76 minutes. That is all it took for Alex Eala to send a four-time Grand Slam champion out of the 2026 Mubadala DC Open with only 6 games to her name. Naomi Osaka, a hard court specialist and former world number 1, walked off Stadium Court in Washington having lost 6-4, 6-2 to a player who was ranked 143rd in the world just 2 years earlier. Her name is Alex Eala. She is 21 years old. She is from the Philippines. And by the end of this story, you will see that what just happened to Osaka was not a one-off. It was the same pattern repeating itself, almost point for point, weeks apart. Stick around, because the real turning point in this story is not even the match everyone is talking about. To understand why this win is remarkable, you have to understand the country Eala represents. The Philippines has exactly one WTA-ranked singles player. Her, a nation of roughly 120 million people whose sporting identity is built on basketball courts and on the legacy of boxer Manny Pacquiao, has never produced a tennis player like this before. Tennis, in the Philippines, has never been the sport that fills gymnasiums or dominates sports pages. Basketball courts sit on nearly every street corner. Boxing produces the country's most recognizable global icon. Tennis, historically, has been a footnote. That absence of a footpath is part of what makes Eala's story unusual. There was no former Filipina pro for her to call for advice, no domestic tennis infrastructure built up over decades to shortcut her development, no clear blueprint left behind by someone who had done this before. Eala left home as a young teenager to train abroad, first without the language, without an established support system, without anyone who had walked this exact road ahead of her. She eventually settled into training at an academy in Spain, thousands of miles from home, building her game essentially from scratch in an environment where nothing about her path was guaranteed to work. For years, that isolation showed up in her ranking. In 2023, she was still grinding through Grand Slam qualifying, unable to crack a main draw. In 2024, an IF title in Spain lifted her to a career-high ranking of 143rd in July. In tennis, that number sits in a kind of purgatory. Too good for the smallest tournaments, where the ranking points on offer barely move the needle. Not quite good enough to guarantee entry into the sport's biggest events, where the prize money and the ranking points that actually change a career are concentrated. Players stuck in that zone often spend years chasing qualifying draws, grinding through smaller challenger-level events, and watching the gap to the top of the sport stay stubbornly wide. And because Eala was the only Filipino on tour, every loss became a national story in a way it never would have for a player with teammates and predecessors sharing the spotlight. There was no diffusion of pressure, no other Filipino name in the draw to share the weight of expectation. Every early exit was covered as a setback for an entire country's tennis ambitions, not simply as one player's bad day at the office. If you have ever been the only person in a room attempting something nobody around you has done before, that was Eala's reality at 20 years old. Then came Miami in March 2025. Eala entered the Miami Open on a wild card, ranked 140th in the world, and proceeded to dismantle the draw. She beat 2017 French Open champion Jelena Ostapenko. She beat 2025 Australian Open champion Madison Keys, then ranked 5th in the world. She beat 5-time Grand Slam champion Iga Swiatek 6-2, 7-5 to become the first Filipina ever to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal and the first to crack the world's top 100. She became, in the process, the first woman from the Philippines to defeat a Grand Slam champion at a tour-level event in the Open era, and she did it 3 separate times in a single fortnight. It was the signature run of her young career, launching her from a ranking outside the world's top 100 into the sport's consciousness almost overnight. But there is a twist that gets lost in the highlight reel. She lost that semifinal. Jessica Pegula, then ranked 4th in the world, edged her in 3 sets, 7-6, 5-7, 6-3, in a match that stretched past midnight and lasted nearly 2.5 hours. Eala had raced to an early lead in the first set before Pegula clawed her way back, then won the second set to force a decider, only to fall away late in the third. It was, by any measure, a marathon that Pegula herself described as leaving her exhausted. That loss mattered less for the scoreline than for what it revealed about the psychology that followed. Before Miami, a second-round exit meant nobody noticed. After Miami, every single match came with the question hanging over it. Is she real, or was that a fluke? Fame in tennis does not just change how a player is covered. It changes what every subsequent loss is assumed to mean. The rest of 2025 tested the answer. Eala reached the final of the Eastbourne Open, her first tour-level final, and lost it in 3 tight sets, saving championship points along the way before ultimately falling short. She finished the year ranked in the world's top 50, a genuinely strong season on paper for a player who had started it outside the top 140, but one that revealed a pattern nonetheless. She was excellent at getting close, and inconsistent at closing. Part of the reason was structural, not just mental. Eala is left-handed but does not hit a big serve, which means she lacks the escape hatch that many elite players rely on in tight moments, the ability to simply blast an unreturnable serve when a game gets tense and manufacture a hold out of nothing. Without that shortcut, every close match has to be won the harder way, point by point, rally by rally, on the back of return games and baseline construction rather than raw power. There was a real version of this story where Eala becomes the dangerous floater who reaches finals but never quite wins, one a player who terrifies seeded opponents in the early rounds but cannot finish the job when a trophy is actually on the line. That version of the story ended in June 2026 in Birmingham. Eala won the WTA 125 level Birmingham Open, her first title of the year. It is easy to overlook a smaller event, played beneath the radar of the sport's biggest headlines, the kind of tournament that rarely makes a highlight package. But it is arguably the real turning point in this entire story, more than anything that would later happen against Osaka. Winning under pressure, even at a smaller level, appears to have unlocked something. It gave her a title to defend her confidence against, rather than only near misses to explain away. The following week in Berlin, playing as a wild card at the WTA 500 Berlin Open, Eala beat world number 2 Elina Svitolina, the 2022 Wimbledon champion, in straight sets, 7-5, 6-4, her first career win over the Kazakh. Then, in the quarterfinals, she beat world number 8 Elina Svitolina, 6-3, 6-4, in their first career meeting, extending her run against elite opponents to 2 consecutive top 10 victories for the first time since Miami. At Wimbledon shortly after, Eala became the first Filipino player in the Open era to reach the 4th round, a milestone that earned her an official presidential citation back home. Here is the detail worth remembering above everything else in this section. 6 weeks later, in Washington, Eala would beat that same opponent, Svitolina, with the identical scoreline of 6-3, 6-4, on a completely different surface, on the other side of an ocean. That repetition is the thesis of this entire story. This is not a hot streak built on adrenaline and a friendly draw. It is a system, refined match by match, and it produces the same result against the same caliber of opponent regardless of the surface underneath her feet. Which brings us to Washington week itself, where Eala moved through the draw like she was working through a checklist of the sport's most dangerous players, one round at a time. In the first round, she faced Qinwen Zheng, an Olympic gold medalist, and lost the opening set before storming back to win, 4-6, 6-4, 6-1, needing all 3 sets to shake off a slow start. In the second round, she faced defending champion Leylah Fernandez and won in a decisive breaker, 6-2, 7-6, closing out the second set under pressure rather than letting the match slip into a third. In the quarterfinals, she faced world number 2 seed Elina Svitolina again and beat her, 6-3, 6-4, the same scoreline as Berlin, delivered against the same opponent on a different surface, weeks apart. And in the semifinals, she faced Naomi Osaka, a 4-time major champion, and beat her, 6-4, 6-2, in 76 minutes. That result gave Eala her 6th win over a top 10 opponent in 2026 alone, extending a run that has made her one of the most talked about players on tour this season, and it also secured her a place in her second career WTA Tour final, and her first ever at the WTA 500 level. The way she beat Osaka tells you almost everything about how this version of Eala wins matches. Osaka won only 59% of her first serve points and was broken 4 times in 12 opportunities. Eala, by contrast, was not overpowering anyone with pace of her own. She won 71% of her first serve points and an even higher 83% on her second serve, according to match statistics, while relentlessly attacking Osaka's service games from the baseline rather than simply trying to survive her own. In the opening set, Osaka actually served first and briefly led, but Eala broke back, traded games to level things at 3-3, and then reeled off the final 3 games in a row to close out the set in 38 minutes. In the second set, Osaka's own serve unraveled a double fault surrendered 1 break. A netted backhand surrendered another, and Eala served out the match at love to end it after 76 minutes on court. Against Svitolina in the quarterfinal, the underlying pattern was the same. Eala did not simply protect her own service games, she hunted the opponent's second serve and turned defense into offense on the return. Her left-handed spin and aggressive return positioning function as her actual weapon on tour, replacing the big serve she does not have. 2 identical scorelines against the same opponent, on grass in Berlin and on hard court in Washington, are not a coincidence. They are a repeatable game plan, executed against elite competition on 2 different continents. There is also a story here that extends well beyond the scoreboard. In the days before their semifinal, Osaka spoke publicly about the atmosphere Eala's matches have generated on tour. Recalling a match of Eala's that she had watched, Osaka said it felt, in her words, even more than a basketball game. She went on to describe the moment as mind-blowing, adding that she had not thought a tennis crowd could ever sound like that, and that she had made a habit of quietly following Eala's story and her growth ever since. Ticket sales in Washington reportedly spiked after Eala's addition to the draw, filling stands for a player who entered the tournament unseeded, and turning early round matches into events with the atmosphere usually reserved for finals. For Eala herself, the significance of the moment has never been framed as being about her individually. It has repeatedly been framed as a reflection of what it means, in this moment, to be Filipino, a country of over 100 million people finally watching one of its own compete deep into the second week of a WTA tournament, night after night, on the other side of the world. It is worth noting that Eala is the only player from her country with a singles ranking on the WTA Tour at all, which means every one of these crowds, every flag, every chant, has assembled around a single athlete rather than a broader national program. That is part of what has made her run through Washington feel, to those following it, less like a sporting upset and more like a cultural moment. That emotional peak sets up what comes next, the final. Eala's opponent is Jessica Pegula, the very player who ended her breakout run in Miami back in 2025. It is the first time they have met since that night, and the stakes this time are considerably higher: a first career WTA Tour singles title, a reported $252,000 in prize money, and a projected climb into the top 20 of the world rankings should Eala win. Ahead of the match, Pegula did not hide her respect for the player standing across the net. "Alex, I'm a big fan of her," Pegula said. "She's the future of the tour, and she's already here." Pegula herself has reached her 4th final of the season, having eliminated Russia's Diana Schneider in the other semifinal after recovering from an early deficit, and enters the match chasing her 12th career WTA title. It is worth being honest about the challenge in front of Eala rather than treating the outcome as a formality. Pegula has already proven she can beat Eala in a deciding set under pressure, and the 2.5-hour marathon they played in Miami showed that Pegula is capable of grinding out exactly the kind of tight, physical contest that has occasionally been Eala's undoing. Fatigue after 3 consecutive straight-set victories in Washington, including 2 wins over top 10 opponents in as many days, is also a legitimate factor heading into a final against one of the most consistent returners on the entire tour. This is not a guaranteed coronation. It is a genuine rematch with a genuinely uncertain outcome between 2 players who both have a real claim to the trophy. So the question this story leaves open is not simply whether Alex Eala eventually breaks into the world's top 20. That question was arguably already being decided the moment she began stacking wins over Grand Slam champions and top 10 opponents in Miami, then in Berlin, then across Washington week. The more interesting question is whether the top 20 was ever supposed to be her ceiling in the first place. Whatever happens in the final against Pegula, the pattern established over the last 2 months, a title in Birmingham, statement wins in Berlin, a historic run at Wimbledon, and now 3 consecutive straight-set victories over seeded opponents in Washington, suggests this is no longer a story about a surprising underdog stealing headlines for a week. It is a story about a system, refined and repeated against the best players in the world, one identical scoreline at a time. And on Sunday, in the biggest final of her career so far, that system faces its toughest test yet.